Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Golden Speaker Series put on by the Technology Licensing Office here at MIT. I invite you all to check out some of our other events and programs and get the most you can from this series. So it is my privilege today to introduce Professor Sertac Karaman. He's worked with the TLO on several ventures now, and it's been a privilege working with him to spin off companies. And he's going to talk about his experiences, both in academia and entrepreneurship. But for those who do not know, he's a professor of Aeroastro at MIT, director of the LIDS Center, the Laboratory for Information and Decision Systems, and he's also on the Robotics Science and Systems Foundation Board and the secretary of the RSS Foundation. He's the founder of several companies, which he's going to talk about as well. And I know he's eager to get started. So without any further ado, please welcome Professor Karaman.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. I never know what to talk about kind of in these kind of situations. But as was mentioned, I'll do a little introduction of myself. So I'll kind of walk through that in a couple of slides. And then, I've done a few companies. So I've been involved in many, but kind of as a kind of founder, co-founder, I'm on my third. So not this one, but the previous one, went through kind of like a reasonable growth. It grew to about like 300 people. It got acquired by a major acquisition by another automotive supplier. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then after that, I have kind of some advice, some ideas, some thoughts, maybe some discussion. So I'll just lead into that. So I may show you some slides. And my background is really kind of in robotics. I do a lot of things that relate to computing. I had done a lot of work in machine learning back when it wasn't so much about neural networks, but like everybody else, I now do some work in machine learning. I'm also the director for LIDS, as it was mentioned before. So it's one of the major research laboratories. So it's largely EECS faculty members, but draws faculty members from all departments. As the director of a research center, I also have to look through, for example, if someone spins out a company and they want to license intellectual property, that would be on me to say, sign it off and so on. So I have some experience coming from there as well. So near the end, I'll kind of focus maybe on the more AI-enabled businesses coming from there, if anyone of you is interested in AI. Nowadays, everybody is, so hopefully we'll get into that. Okay, let's get started. So a little bit about me before we get started. So I actually got my master's from MIT in mechanical engineering. I got a PhD in computer science. I'm a professor in Aeroastro. I don't have any Aeroastro degrees, but I'm very passionate. They did hire me in that department. I switched around quite a bit. So if you're in one of these departments, I walk through the corridors of all of them. I'm the director of LIDS now. So you may or may not have heard about LIDS, but if you know of EECS, EECS has three major laboratories. They're EECS connected, but they're actually spun out of EECS back in the 70s. Now they're like interdepartmental. There's RLE, there's CCEL, and there's LIDS. So I became the director of LIDS about 3 years ago, after my previous company was acquired. And when I took over, I think we were about 15 or 17 faculty members. Now we're like 50. And so LIDS saw like a quick expansion very rapidly. We almost tripled the size of the lab. And part of this was the opening of the new College of Computing. And so College of Computing ended up hiring 50 new faculty members. About half of that went into LIDS, and the other half went into, maybe less than the other half, went into CCEL. CCEL was already big, so it grew CCEL by like 10%, but it like tripled the size of LIDS, basically. And so I still continue to do that. In terms of research, I do a lot of foundational research. My research group, when I look at it now, I'm kind of interested in anything that relates to robotics. I don't kind of constrain myself to something. I usually leave my graduate students open to exploration. Before I took over LIDS, I had like a group of 35 people, which was kind of pretty large. But then, with work in LIDS, I had to slow down a little bit. So now my group is like about 15 graduate students. I let them pick and choose what they do. And I realized that they kind of got into these three buckets. So a set of people work on applying generative AI tools into robotics. You're seeing these kind of tools that, do video generation, for example. You can use that for simulation and robotics. You can do a lot more. You can even use that simulation to do planning. So if you're a robot, you could just take a look at the world around you and simulate it forward, including simulating yourself. Kind of a video generation of yourself becomes like your decision making, for example. And so some people are interested in that. Some people are interested in this concept called reinforcement learning. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but it's kind of like the next thing in machine learning, I think. If one day works, it could really revolutionize things. Like you would be able to do machine learning without data. Be quite cool. So a lot of people focus on that. And then my group does a lot of chip design for robotics as well. Like we literally design the chips. We get them fabbed at, say, TSMC or Intel foundries. We have experience on both. And we do that so that we can get very efficient robotic systems. So that would allow your robots to be, say, more affordable, or it would allow them to be much smaller. Like, for example, in terms of drones, we try to build drones that are like the size of your watch. It could be like an indoor drone that could fly around here. I'm interested in applications in aerial drones, self-driving cars. Recently, I got really interested in AR, VR. And as we talked about before, I've done a few businesses by now, but I'm going to focus on this one that got acquired. So now in the lab, we have like a lab environment here. We'll fly drones. Not that drones are very important, but they're like small, they're easy to work with, and it's like an autonomous platform. We'll make them fully autonomous, like that whole trajectory that you've seen, sort of gate-to-gate racing, it was doing completely autonomously. And in terms of Optimus Ride, I'll get into more detail about this, but we were working on building autonomous shuttles. So I'll tell you a little bit the business case and a little bit the technology on that. But just as a preview, so this is like a fully autonomous shuttle. It comes here. There's like a little area. This is like a retirement community. It picks up people from there and drives fully autonomously as a shuttle in this community. So, okay, so I do all of these things. So now I'm going to start out. Throughout the presentation, if you have a question, please ask. It becomes much more interesting if it's interactive. Especially, I don't know what you guys are interested in. I have a lot of slides I can jump through, okay? Right when I say that, I think there's one question in the back. Yes?
Why did you get hired for AeroAstro?
Why did I end up in AeroAstro? Yeah, so here's what happened. I think throughout, I was really interested in autonomous vehicles, and I was especially interested in, how do we make them in a way that we can guarantee their safety. So even though I swapped departments quite rapidly, that has been my research focus. It still is today. So maybe let me kind of get into that a little bit. What does that mean? How do we do that? Guarantee safety. You can build a robot, like a self-driving car, and it might be very safe, statistically speaking. But how do you guarantee safe? Sometimes being safe is not enough. You need to kind of provide some guarantees. We can do that in the aerospace domain with aircraft. And so aircraft is they're demonstrably safe. There's a lot of things you can do when you design software for them. There's some redundancy components and this and that. And then separately, there's a lot of statistical testing of all of these things. So you hear a lot about like aircraft accidents, but frankly, as a mode of transportation, aircraft, even though it looks like a wild airplane going hundreds of miles an hour with jet engines through the air, it's actually by far the safest form of transportation. And so that safe autonomy still continues in my research. Doing some simple video generation to do robot decision making, that's simple. Anybody can put that together. We think about how do you do that and guarantee safety at the same time. That's research. Now that's interesting. And same things apply out here throughout. And so when I was looking for faculty positions, our AeroAstro department, that's what they were interested in. They were interested in autonomy and safety at the same time. Frankly, they didn't care about airplanes. In fact, when I applied, I had no experience on airplanes. I was building self-driving cars. My whole job talk to the aeronautics department had self-driving cars in it. But they were excited about hiring me to the department. I think that's a bit of a combination. Then I ended up in AeroAstro of me being interested in safety and autonomy, and AeroAstro being kind of more flexible about what AeroAstro really means. That's a good question. If any other questions, just raise your hand and have a discussion, okay? So how did I really end up there? It was like this. So I came in as a graduate student, 2007. This was the first project I worked on. It's a fully autonomous car. It's going to turn around. There's nobody in it. This was in 2007. 2007, you didn't have the iPhone, you didn't have smartphones as much. There was like no machine learning. People think that neural networks had no future whatsoever. It was like a very different world. And we were working on that at this time. It was actually a kind of a thing that DARPA put together a race for people to go and build a self-driving car. If you're familiar with the self-driving car industry, most of the people who is leading the industry are alumni of this particular race. So MIT put together a team. There was a couple other races before in the desert. MIT didn't participate on those. So it was like our first. We had MIT faculty, postdocs, and students. It was basically 8 full-time graduate students that did all the software. And so I was one of those 8. Here I am, much younger. And also a bunch of other friends and people that have come together. My doctoral thesis advisor, Emilio Frazzoli, started another company now called Motional. So it was called Nutonomy, then Aptive, and then Motional. It's still active. And so he was also there. We had another person, Ed Olson, who started something called May Mobility. It's another company that's active right now in this space, maybe like several hundred people. And for Optimus Ride, I met my co-founder, Albert Huang, who was our CTO, also over here in this race. And I could go throughout, like most of the people are kind of in leading roles, like, say, I'm going to give another example, like there's Luke Fletcher, he must be somewhere here, I think right there. He's right here. So he's like a VP at Toyota in autonomous driving, for example. So people are still doing similar things. A lot of people right after the race actually went to Google. Google was building this thing at the time, the Google autonomous car that became Waymo. I was a junior graduate student, so we stayed on, but still kept building autonomous systems. So in 2008 to 10, this is the project that I worked on. So it was an autonomous forklift, so you could take a megaphone and yell, "Forklift, come to receiving," and it would just go autonomously to that area. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, if I can. So forklift goes to that area. Now the user has a handheld tablet. You drove the pallet on the handheld tablet. Robot says pallet pick up and goes and picks up this pallet. The handheld tablet, back in the day, there was a company called Nokia. People in this room may not be familiar with it, but it was making cell phones. So it's a Nokia handheld tablet. The robot speaks. You can actually talk to the robot. Again, 2010 would be, this was pre-iPhone, pre-Siri, or Alexa or whatever. Even robot speaking was a very difficult task. So then robot says, pallet, pick up, that kind of a speech is what you hear from the robot, and it all worked kind of ultimately. I've kind of at the time realized that this kind of an application of self-driving autonomy technology was a lot more closer to market than the bigger, let's say, like we're going to build a self-driving car that drives from Harvard Square to Times Square like in a snowstorm. That I thought was extremely hard. So in 2010 to about 2013, we worked on smaller versions of this. So this is one of my students. He's holding something, but it's like a dead man switch. So if you let it go, the robot will stop. Okay, so if something goes wrong, he'll just release the switch. Otherwise, this thing is autonomous. We're actually in a real warehouse for another company in Boston. And they have a lot of pallets in the warehouse, and we're handling those. And this was actually deployed. What happens is that these boxes, so this was a company, it's a company called AB InBev. It's a beer brewer. You may have heard about it. They have this, if you're familiar with Bud Light, it's like one of the beers, very widely, used to be widely utilized. There's a lot of controversy right now. Anyway, so they pack those, and they pack another 400 brands. And so how the warehouse works is that inside the warehouse, say you're like a restaurant, you order 20 different brands from them, and you have like different numbers of cases that you want to order. And somebody packs that pallet. Basically, they are in a forklift like this. They go around the warehouse, they fork the first brand, they go out, they pick the second brand and the third brand and make a pallet. They bring it to that area that you've seen, that's a wrapping area, so the pallet gets wrapped up. So they wait for like an hour and a half, 2 hours to wrap the pallet, and they're just like waiting there. Once that is wrapped, they put it back here in the staging area. We went to this warehouse, we told them that, look, we're gonna automate one task. we're just gonna, the person who picks the brands will put it in the wrapping area and we'll go pick up a new order. We'll not wait for the 1.5, 2 minutes. We'll have an autonomous forklift that'll just take up the pallet from the wrapping area once the wrapping is done and put it in the staging area. That was somehow annualized. It was like a $2 million savings for them of like people just basically going around. So they could easily pay for a robot like this, like $1 million. And in fact, you could do this with like one robot. It sounds like, how could this happen? But when you think about it, you have like the annual cost of people picking and doing things there is like $5-6 million. You have a lot of people just working on forklifts. And average time for going around and picking all the cases into one wrapping area is like 7 minutes. And they wait for 2 minutes after that. So if you cut down those 2 minutes, you all of a sudden you save $1 million out of their like $10 million budget. So this was actually deployed. And it's MIT technology too. It wasn't like a company or anything. They came to MIT, they paid for it, they took the technology. They didn't even hire another company. Like we basically transferred the technology to them. As a result, they basically worked with TLO. They had the rights to use it. It's non-exclusive. They never bought the exclusive rights, but they ended up actually using it for some time. Up until 2 years later, another company came in and sold them a very similar product, basically. So this, I think, culminated in a lot of learning for me. Back in 2015, we launched this company called Optimus Ride. 2015 was the year that Elon Musk said that in 2016, all Teslas will be autonomous. He kept saying that and just kind of putting it out 2 years later. I do think that he actually has like 4 or 5 years left. So not all Teslas, not all the time, but he might showcase some autonomous things soon. But in 2015, knowing the technology, we thought it's just outright impossible to do that. Just not possible in the next decade. So we thought that maybe we could think about what you can really do, say, from 2015 in 2025, which will be right now. We thought about what you could really do in 2025 and try to actually work towards that. So we thought that what's possible maybe is that we don't make everything autonomous all at the same time, but we could go to certain places in the country and provide autonomous shuttles that work in medium complexity environments. So there's some complexity in the environment, but it's not like Cambridge or Boston or New York downtown. It's more like a suburban environment, think about it that way. And we limit the speeds to say like 30 miles an hour. We thought that in 10 years, maybe we could do that. Looking back wasn't actually a bad estimate. Maybe you need a little bit more than 10 years, but not much more. So we launched this company. We had a lot of investors. One thing I'll say is that I was engaged with NVIDIA back in the day. I was an NVIDIA graduate fellow. I got the fellowship in 2010, I think. It's still out there, so if you wanted to apply for it, if any graduate students, you definitely should. In 2010, NVIDIA was tanking, so I got the fellowship. We shook hands with Jensen Huang. We were only 5 people who came there. So we became friends. I even consulted with them at the time. When I was doing consulting, they didn't have any cash. So Jensen would tell us that they don't have cash, so they will just give us shares. We're like, okay, that sounds good. We'll do anything. It doesn't matter. You don't even have to pay us. So we had that kind of a thing. But when I was launching the company, Jensen Huang basically wrote the first check. So he just wrote like $500K, like $500,000 out of his pocket. And that he was our angel investor. So it was still 2015, so NVIDIA wasn't like it was today, right? So it was still like an unknown company. And then we went around, basically raised money from some of the key players, like Graycroft and FirstMark kind of got one of the rounds, or one of them got one round, the other one got the other round. These are sort of well-known New York venture capital firms. We got some investment from F Prime. They're based out here. They're like the venture arm of Fidelity. We got a bigger investment from Emerson Collective. So this is like a venture fund of Lorraine Powell Jobs. And we had like a bunch of other people. We raised about $100 million in total. And we grew about to about 300 people at the time of the acquisition. So this is what the places we operated look like. I kind of showed you this video already. This is a place called Union Point. It is in the Boston area. It's down in Weymouth, I think, in the south part of Boston. It's like a suburb. This is kind of a quote-unquote a gated community. There's really no gates. Like you can just drive around it. But the thing with the gated community is that the roads that you see here, or a lot of the infrastructure, even including traffic lights, they're not built by the city of Weymouth, but they're built by the developer who manages this site. So then this becomes like a private property. So when you wanted to go and do autonomy out here, so the law is that so long as the private property owner, the developer, agrees, you can do a lot of things. So you don't need to necessarily work with the city. So we got attracted to this location. We were basically operating these vehicles fully autonomously. It was key to compile a bit of like a good founding team at the time. That's what I thought, at least. So I myself, I was the chief scientist for the company. I acted as the president for some time. I was also a board member. As I told earlier, one of my close friends, Albert Huang, we were graduate students together out here. I was in Lids and he was in CSAIL. He went out to Google to work at Google for some time, and then he came back as a CTO full-time. I had another friend from the Media Lab, Ryan Chin. He was a PI at the Media Lab, so he gave up his Media Lab PI role and joined the business as the CEO. We also had Jenny, who was an MBA and urban planning master's, joint master's from MIT. So she was a student at Sloan when we were kind of getting together as an MBA student, so we picked her up. And then we also had Ramiro, who was also at the Media Lab and also at Harvard Design School. And he was visiting here for a year from Ecuador, so we picked him up as well. As you can see, we basically like covered all of MIT, different labs and centers. And our story actually, it really contributed to our story. When we went out to people to raise funding, for example, they could see that we not only had the technology part or the science part of the business, but we also had thought about, say, like design or urban planning and so on. So we could really tell them a rounded story on how this will become a major business. And that, I think, was very important. We had our headquarters. So this is sort of Boston. MIT is right here. This is the Seaport area. So this is kind of an older picture. Seaport is now much more developed. The city of Boston allowed autonomous vehicles to operate in this part of Seaport. So we could actually operate autonomously with a safety driver behind the wheel. And we had our headquarters right here, like 3 sides ocean. We had 2 floors in there, like kind of I think maybe 50, 60,000 square foot, like a pretty large space. It was a fun place to be. One of our first customers, so we had like a few $1 million in revenue. I think we were looking near the time of the acquisition to about like 10 million a year in revenue. Although I should note that the cost of revenue was a lot higher. So we were basically making a loss every time we were getting a revenue. But one of our major customers was Brookfield Properties. I'm not sure if you've heard of this name, but they're the largest developer in the country. They have about $250 billion of development kind of going, at hand. And they build a variety of buildings out there. They also built like these kinds of business parks. This is one of the business parks I think they had near DC. So they were kind of planning that at the time we kind of joined them. So it was going to have like a whole bunch of buildings and so on. Notice that there's some buildings that are nothing but parking lots. Like there's one here, and the top of some of the buildings are also parking lots. So when they kind of start working on these things, they were thinking about these. Like how do they do the transportation and so on. And maybe I can kind of tell you a little bit how our business model quickly evolved. So when we started meeting them, we realized that this was a property development that would cost them about $1.5 billion to build everything. About $350 million goes to parking. That includes parking spots kind of on the road, that's a little cheaper, but also includes these gigantic parking structures that actually I didn't know at the time, but they need to be reinforced a lot better. There's some more regulations on top of them and so on. Why would they build parking? You would think that they're just nice, so they build parking so that there's no traffic, but actually there's regulations. So basically the city that they built here tells them that there needs to be a certain amount of parking given a certain amount of office space, and they regulate that. When we built in, so this was half built and we brought in our shuttles. When we brought in the shuttles, we realized that people are actually using our shuttles and the parking need is going down. And so they were on path to, so we were talking to the city at the time, it wasn't approved, but they were on the path to agree with the city so that they could reduce the parking a little bit if they have a very good and broad shuttle service. And that little bit reduction in parking was $80 million cost savings for them. And that $80 million, by the way, became like parks and things like that, so that the property itself looked much nicer as opposed to having a bunch of buildings for like just kind of maintaining parking. So then we started realizing that actually what we started out as a business that was going to be all these wild technology for autonomous cars, really what we were doing is we were trying to take this notion of shuttles that everybody hates, right? I'm sure you've all been in a shuttle. Everybody hates the shuttles. I can tell you why. And we turned it into a thing that everybody loves and wants to use. That became the mission of the company. You know, make shuttles like likable and nice. You hate the shuttles because shuttles have a lot of seats. You know, a typical shuttle you think about is like a 20-seater. In fact, you internalize it so much that when you think of a shuttle, you think of a 20-seater. A better shuttle would have 4 seats. You can't do that because most of the cost of a shuttle is the driver. And so now you attach a lot of seats to the driver, and driver drives those seats around. If you have a lot of seats, the shuttle is big. So it has a lot of inertia. It needs to accelerate and decelerate. You need to climb up. When you sit, it's very tight. And then it's on a route. So you need to wait a lot for a shuttle to arrive. If it was a 4-seater, it'd be a lot more comfortable. It also could have some dynamic routing. So when you call it, it would arrive right away. And you would go to your location right away. You wouldn't need to run it on a loop. You would run it much like an Uber. But it would be a lot cheaper if you did it nicely. We also realized that from a design perspective, you limit the speeds to say like 30 miles an hour, like here, you don't have to build like the 2-ton gigantic cars that we have. I mean, you can build something much smaller, much nicer, like the ones that I've shown in the video. And so all of a sudden we realized that the unit economics of this really checks out. And this is like a really great business model if you work with a developer from the onset, especially if you can convince the city that you can cut down on parking spots. So that became our business model over the years. And it actually was working. It really was in good shape and working. We also kind of found other places. So we were the only autonomous vehicle deployment in New York City. There's a place called the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The city of Brooklyn is currently transforming that area into more like a startup incubation space. So we were out there. You could, for example, take the ferry. There was a ferry coming from the Wall Street station from Manhattan. You could take that, come in. We were actually already integrated with the ferry. So you could tap your ferry ticket into our car, just get in, and kind of tap a place that you wanted to go, and you could go there. Almost everybody who took the ferry used our car. It was quite nice, and we would just kind of operate that in the entire space. What happened? In 2021, Magna acquired the company. I can tell you the backstory a little bit of what happened, given it's recorded, only the public parts. But I think that it's, you know, I can say that we basically, at the time, there was something called the SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Vehicles. Who have heard of a SPAC? Maybe some people, only very few. Great. So it was a craze at the time that you could do this weird thing where anybody, like one of you, could go to the public markets, say the New York Stock Exchange, and say, hey, you know, my name is John, and I'm going to raise some money, $300 million, and I'm just going to sell people some shares, and all you know is me, and I'm going to take that money and go find another company to buy, and I'm going to invest that into another company, make that company public. The weirdest deal that you could ever think of. I don't know how it worked at the time. I guess the interest rates were so low that people were working on any kind of possible investment vehicles. So we got actually a letter of intent from one of the SPAC sponsors. The price on it was very high. So we were like a pre-revenue, and we had some revenue, but like we were a pre-product company, and we were valued at like billions of dollars, basically. That just kind of defied gravity. But we were like, okay, sure, this makes sense, so let's go for it. The deal is that you get the $300 million, but you also need to raise money from some other investments. That's called a PIPE. It's sort of like a private investment in public equity, so kind of shortens as PIPE. So basically, you need to find some other investors who are typical institutional investors. That could be like your Fidelity or your Goldman Sachs or Bank of America. Could also be some of the strategic ones. Like, for example, you can get some investment from Toyota, Volvo, or some of the automotive suppliers. During that process, we got engaged with Magna. So Magna is one of the bigger automotive suppliers here in the United States, based in Michigan. So you don't hear about it usually because you don't literally go out buy something from Magna. But whatever car you buy, most likely it's sensors, like it has radars, cameras, whatever. It's all made by Magna. And so we met Magna at that time. It turned out that Magna was already working on some other acquisition of another company that fell apart. And so they wanted to acquire our company. And at the time, the SPAC market was a little crazy, and it was all kind of tanking. So I think all our board members were kind of wanted to move on. And so we got acquired. They didn't want to make the acquisition price public, also because they're still acquiring actually similar companies to make like a bit of the space for them. One of the things that is public that I can tell you is that they have a lot of like autonomous sort of like Tesla autopilot like products, but for the new electric vehicle companies. Like there's a company called Fisker, for example. It's very small, but it uses their autopilot. So that's now made by Optimus Ride. But they also continue the autonomous shuttle type of a vision. They're now trying to go to like airports and things like that and try to put like autonomous shuttles there. And so that's nice. It's all kind of continuing, and they're trying to do the same things. Back in 2015, we thought probably in 2025 you could do these things. I think it was a decent shot. So it's about right that you can go to some of these places and do a deployment that is so that you can generate some profits. Meaning that you can put some shuttles there and you can operate them in a way that, so in the current shuttles, one person operates one vehicle and you have some extra people to say like park it or clean it and whatever. In Optimus Ride, I didn't show you about what we were doing is that it's not fully autonomous. So there's always some people who are just remotely monitoring how the vehicle is doing and so on. But the key thing is so that you can have a team of 10 people, say, monitor like a fleet of 20 or 50 or 100 vehicles. And so they're now able to do that at Magna. Like they can, so that the economics kind of works, and they're trying to, as I said, deploy it with airports, and they have something in the UK, and they're trying to grow that. And the company has grown since the acquisition, so they still have the same space, and there are now more people and trying to do some things there. So it's a little bit of my experience. I'll do a few minutes of like some lessons learned, and we can do a bit of a Q&A. So one is that I realized this is a little bit late, but now that the TLO is here, intellectual property really turns out to be prime, especially if you end up in a scenario where your company is being acquired, or even when you go out for an IPO. Not that we went to an IPO with this company, but we almost did. And we realized that like they literally want to understand what is the intellectual portfolio in the company. You could tell them that, oh, I have the software, I don't have any patents. That could be fine. But then you want to make sure that there's some good amount of tech that's built in-house. They literally are looking for something that would enable the company to be the leader for some time to come. One easy way to do that is to have hundreds of patents. We've seen a lot of people in the business kind of do that. We had tens of patents, like something on that order, which was very helpful. So that's something that's important. Another thing that I kind of realized is that I think a lot of MIT spin-outs have very good engineers in them, like MIT grads and so on. And we tend to get obsessed sometimes a little bit with the quality of the technology in the products. So now, in a high-growth company, that doesn't work. A lot of the mistakes that I see is very good engineers are trying to build very, very high-quality software or hardware and things like that. That's great, but if you already had like a team of 100, and that was like your entire team, that's exactly the right thing to do. But if it's very high growth, you could work on something with one person today, or 2 months from now, you can have 3 people working on it. Right now, what is best to do is to demonstrate that you have the lead to, say, other investors or other customers and so on, so that you can get more resources to build more. Mistake I see being made is people take a long time to kind of build the perfect thing, but then up until you can show something, it's impossible to get like more investment, or it's impossible to get more customers. So it's always great to demonstrate good technology if you're seeking investors, or put out a product so that you can get some revenue, so that you can build on. Keep in mind, in a lot of these companies, what you want is very high rate growth. You want to be able to rapidly scale. If you're doing that, you can do something right now, just put it together, and 3 months later, if you're really scaling that fast, you'll have 10 more people to work on it again. You will build and rebuild again and again and again. So no need to perfect it right now. You'll get a chance to rebuild it, maybe 3-4 months later. It's better to focus on how do I get more resources. And I would also add that it was impossible to know what the market really wants. So it's good to iterate. If we didn't put out a product with, say, Brookfield Properties, we would never know what really they were interested in. We put out a product, we could see what the product would drive. I don't think they even knew. They realized that people really do use these shuttles because they're a lot more comfortable. And all of a sudden, they realized they could cut down on parking. All of a sudden, our product was very valuable. I don't think they knew that either. So we were able to put a product out to kind of test it, even though the cost of operating the product was more than the revenue that we were getting. It was valuable for us to run. So that's another one. There's a few things on the market side, which is that one other pitfall that I see sometimes is that people focus on a small market, create a niche product, and that always goes out into a dead end. I'm sad to say. Sometimes the kind of technology we build here is very impactful, but is impactful in 10 years from now. Right now, it's a very small market. And that may be fine, probably, but at the very least, from the onset, you got to see that this is going to be big at some point. If you don't have a story to make it big, investment is not interested. That's basically it. Another way to put that is that when you're building a company, you know, there's the product that you're building and there's the market that you're going. People talk about product market fit, right? So think about there's the product and the market. If I'm an investor, I look at a company, I don't want to take a risk both on the product and on the market. I want to take a risk ideally on one of them. What does that mean? So if you come out and say you're building the next social network, right? That's not a big product risk. A social network will be some sort of a web app, maybe it will be some mobile app or something like that. It can be built. The hard part isn't building the product. The hard part is whether once you build it, the markets will take it. So that's a market risk. That's on the one extreme. On the other extreme, you could be building self-driving cars that can operate in any possible condition and will cost like 10K. Well, obviously, if you can build it, everybody will buy it, right? The question is, can you build it? What I see as a pitfall is that sometimes people come up with a company that has risk on both. The product is very hard to build, but even when you build it, the market, it's not very clear if the market wants it. So ideally, you want to bet on only one of them. That's the ideal scenario. And most of you, kind of having been at MIT, more likely will find something that the product is hard to build, but when you build it, it's a big success, right? And that's not actually a bad company. What happens with that is that once you build it and when the product is coming, and that's what we faced, there's a lot of interest. So even if you couldn't really take it all the way to like an IPO and a big company, there's a lot of acquisition interest on it. So some successful outcome, if you can really execute it, is very likely. As opposed to like in a market risk, you may not quite get that.
How much politics got involved in your decisions in marketing?
What kind of politics?
Like elections?
Yeah,
elections?
yeah. I mean, that's. I think that it's something to pay attention to. I would say, you know, it does sway the markets, especially like in some of the newer companies that I'm doing. Like if you're selling to the government, that certainly is the case. You're pretty tied. With these, I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. So I think that if you really have some technology that the markets will definitely accept, I think maybe you're like a little bit free of the politics. But I do think that one of my slides will be later is that at the end, I think timing is one of the most important things. It really does matter. You can come at the right time, at the right place, and that's the thing that matters the most, in my opinion. And timing is affected by everything. Like politics could be one thing. And timing doesn't mean go early sometimes. Like sometimes you're the earliest company, you go there, you take all the arrows and you die. Someone else comes in and they can continue what you're doing. And sometimes you're just late. You know, like people have picked up and they're doing, and you come in and there's already these big players and they can do anything. So related to the timing, it's not just sort of, am I early or late, but it could be that there's some politics involved and so on. I hope that answers your question. There's a couple other things I'll say quickly. One is that, you know, people with expertise and connections was really important. I realized, like, I don't think us just bunch of people who worked on technology out here at MIT, we weren't connected to Brookfield Properties. We ended up hiring a few people, and they just been in the industry for property development for 20 years, and they knew everybody. Not just they knew everybody, but I think that the key difference was that they were trusted by those people. We could go to them and say, hey, look, we have the best product ever, but they would say, okay, you know, like we hear that from everybody. But if there was somebody in the industry with a great reputation who would be inside our company, has seen everything that we have, and go out to them and say the same thing, there's a huge difference. And so you could close business deals that way. And the other thing, maybe the last one, is that I'm sorry to say this, but I think we kind of sometimes obsessed a lot with the product first approach. Like we have this technology, we're going to build a product, and we don't hear the market so much, but the market is very, very important. So I would kind of keep that in mind. I didn't have so much time for the AI part. There's one slide, but I'll skip it. But maybe I'll conclude with like a couple of things, like if you wanted to spin out a company. One is that, as I said with the big markets, like it's important to be bold. Don't be scared to be bold. Go there. It takes decades to build this thing. But think about where you would be a decade from now. 2015, or some of the things that I showed you a decade and a half ago, I mean, we're here today. It was so different back then. A decade is a long time. So you can do something really big in one decade. And that's the thing that they're asking for. So be bold. You know, don't be afraid to be bold. Timing is the most important. That's what I was telling you. Sometimes you got to seize the opportunity. Sometimes you're too early. But think about timing. Think about why is it the right time to do what you're doing now? And why isn't it last year? Why isn't it not next year? Literally 1 year difference. Why? And you should have a clear answer to that. As I said earlier, it's important to stay focused. One other thing that I see is that we get very busy. We're doing like 10 different things at the same time. That's not for a startup. It's a lot of work, to be frank with you. And finally is that this mistake that I think we make, I think it's always good to start with the market, and then you can like kind of understand what your product, hence what your technology will be, right? You build technology, with that you build a product, with that you go to a market. Don't start with the technology. I suggest start with the market and go back, and then you'll know what to build. That's all I got. Maybe we have some time for questions. Thank you. Yeah, I tried to leave like 15 minutes, but yeah.
Thank you, Sertac. That was fascinating to hear the story of Optimus after the fact. What could the industry, with perfect, hindsight vision, 2020 hindsight vision, what do you think the industry collectively, AV industry collectively, could have done over the past 10 years, knowing how slow it's been to deploy? It took a little longer than Elon Musk thought back in 2015.
Yeah. I think that so the industry went through a few phases of excitement, and I can tell you all of them. Actually, it starts back in the 90s. The one in the 90s I'll skip. But right after Urban Challenge, we solved one problem, and that's what Google picked up. It's knowing where the car is, knowing where I am. And so we would basically build these HD maps. We would have the LiDARs on the vehicles that would turn, and the vehicle would know where it is. And we got very excited. That was false excitement. We knew that back then. We knew that knowing where you are wasn't the end of the problem. Like, you also need to know where everybody else is, and you have to make decisions after that. And so what people got excited, they did some things. And then in 2012 to 2015 came the deep learning revolution. That finally enabled us to know where everybody else is. And so we could actually detect cars from a camera image or a LiDAR scan. We could do it very reliably. That's when I got excited. But then I knew that that wasn't enough either. What you need to do is, now you know where you are, now you know where everybody else is, but now you need to like predict what everyone else is going to do, and you need to make some decisions. That sounds simple, but it's not. Especially when there's a lot of interactions. Like, I do something and you react to that. Hence, I need to think about what do I do so that you react and then I do that. That is very complicated. And it could be very context dependent as well. But I sincerely think that back in the day, I thought that, okay, like maybe that's a gap we can close in 10 years. It'd be a lot easier to close that in low speed, low complexity environments that you don't need to do like very complicated decisions. So that's what we started with. I think that the industry, in order to raise money and stay, went with this hype, but I honestly wasn't a part of that hype. Like, I could have told you the same thing back in 2015. Maybe even 10 years was a good estimate, but I honestly think that this whole ChatGPT, big data AI moment fixes quite a bit of that. Like now we're able to put similar things on cars and they have a lot of the context, they can understand what's happening, who is doing what. I'll give you an example, like I consulted a little bit with people at Cruise back in the day. And we had these instances of like public instances, you can read it on the news. Like Cruise cars basically come in and they want to go through a road, the road is empty, they just go in. Except that on the road, there's a fire truck parked on the sidewalk, there's firemen running around, and there's a building on fire. There's like flames coming out the building, but the car doesn't have that understanding quite. Sure, it can, you can make a fire detector, it can detect the fire, but then after the big data, enabled AI models came in, I could take a camera image from that, put it into something like ChatGPT and say, hey, look, I'm an autonomous car, this is what I see, what should I do? It tells me, don't go in that street, the building is on fire, firemen are running, you have to play it safe. So I think we finally have the tools, learned with massive scale data, they can understand these things. So I'm finally now excited that we can actually kind of do this. I think it's the final gap. But then I think that the industry a little bit ran out of steam. And a lot of the capital markets are more focused on the quicker wins with AI. So my guess is that they'll first exhaust the quick wins, and then the more like the robotics and some of the others will be next. And even in robotics, I think self-driving cars is a bit harder. But like if you could build, say, a small quadruped robot, or maybe even a small humanoid, who could maybe tidy up your house, right? Like simple things, I can just like basically make your bed or put some, like it doesn't have to cook in the kitchen or, do the dishes, right? But it could be like do some simple tidying up and maybe some version of Siri Alexa in it. Would you pay $100, $150 a month? Maybe, many people would pay. And so it's like a $10,000 robot people can lease. And so I think a lot of the investment in robotics is focusing there right now. But I think that the self-driving cars are possible. It's just a matter of, capital allocation plus talent allocation, I think at this point. Long answer. Yes.
Yes, thank you. My question kind of touches on, it seems that some of the changes in the direction for the technology or the product that you were working on came like from the outside, like going from the, the DARPA challenge from an autonomous car to the pallet to the internal. And it seems like a choice to not solve the big problem, but provide a product, whether it's in the factory. I mean, we've got Roombas and Kiva and, rethinking like the smaller quote unquote problem rather than trying to solve the whole, how do I make a car, avoid fires, et cetera. How would you recommend someone resist that urge to keep, to solve all the big problems and work on something for 10 years versus, hey, why don't we scale it back and make a vacuum for the house because we might be able to sell that or get an investment? And how would you incorporate that into a place like MIT with intelligent, driven people want to solve the big problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of said it, here up top. So I don't mean to say sort of like give up the vision. I think actually like a decade from now, big company vision is very essential. I think it's very difficult to like survive without that, but it's also very difficult to like survive. So if you're like a pre-product company for 10 years, so you don't have revenue, so you need to get investment so that you can actually pay people's salaries, right? And maybe you have other operations to pay and everything. So the only way people can value your company is their perception of how good it is. And so you need to somehow give them that perception. I don't know how you do that. Some companies have like some, I don't know, like for lack of a better word, like godlike figures, everything, somehow they can convince people, maybe if you're a previous OpenAI co-founder, you can do that nowadays. Or some other companies do great demos. They don't necessarily have a product, but it's just that the demo blows your mind. And they can keep, raising billions of dollars, like literally billions. I mean, $1 billion is the amount of money that you would spend for like a 2,000 people company annually. They can just afford it. Or another route would be that you go to the market and you start actually raising some revenue. You don't have to support your company with revenue, but the moment you have revenue, investors will look at how quickly that revenue is growing. They're not necessarily interested in how much revenue you have. So a lot of people report, like in SaaS companies, 60% ARR growth, for example. Like they don't actually say how much their annual recurring revenue is. They're looking at the growth. So that's another, I think these are all different kind of sets of things that you can do. I feel like I have been a little bit more luckier personally in various companies in the latter two. Either we have some great demos that we can show people that just basically doesn't exist. You need to back that up, right? Like you need to have why you can do that and others cannot. But there's various ways to do that. Maybe you have some very cool technology, or maybe you have some great people or whatever. Or basically go to the market and just essentially creating interest in the market. Pretty clear that market wants the product. And hence you can supercharge that with investment. If you go to the investors and you don't have anything, you're probably not going to get an investment. That's another thing that people do. I also think that here at MIT, so it's maybe a deeper talk, but I think over the years, we tend to be a little bit more obsessed with like, we're just going to build the best possible thing. Sometimes that's the right solution, I think, to a variety of problems. Frankly, we've been luckier in like defense companies and so on that maybe that's actually needed. But in a lot of other settings, I think I've seen us, lost to other approaches. And this is very historic, like I think if you ask me. So like for instance, I'll tell you something. I mentioned to you LIDS, right? LIDS is like, it's actually the oldest lab at MIT right now. One of the spin-outs at LIDS is the Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. Who has heard about DEC? Some people, great. So DEC was here in Boston. It's an MIT spin-out. It's literally 2 engineers at LIDS. I could even find them in our documents. They spun out this company to build computers. They had 100,000 people. They were a big public company. Silicon Valley didn't exist. People actually thought about Boston's kind of like, sort of like that I-95 arc as the emerging Silicon Valley. But then I think they got competed out by Sun Microsystems. They had great computers that they were selling to businesses for $30,000. Sun Microsystems were churning things out for like $5K. And at some point, people went to Sun to buy that. And they were in the valley. And so at some point, DEC tanked. And I think they had that whole MIT mentality to go out and build the best thing. But sometimes you just got to build a product for like affordable for what people need, as opposed to, hey, look, it has all the edges beautiful and perfect. I'm a perfectionist myself, but I sort of like try to hold myself back and try to listen to the market and the companies. And that's my approach at the very least.
Thank you for the talk. My question is about potential safety concerns or the issue of people not being ready to adopt a new and potentially, unfamiliar idea.
That's a great question. I'll tie that back to like one of the miscalculations we had in the industry. That was another question. Is that in the industry, here's what we thought. We thought that if we could build a car that can do basically ride sharing like Uber, Lyft, and if we can demonstrate to you that it's safer than Uber, Lyft, you would adopt it right away, right? That's what we thought. That was stupid because people put robots to a lot higher bar. It's actually demonstrated since last year that Waymo Cruise cars can match, statistically speaking, like a rideshare driver, but people still don't adopt them. I think that, and that's what we drew through as well, like we really obsessed with the safety case, which basically just said that the whole thing in the industry was we were gonna have a safety driver, and safety driver was gonna take over when necessary, and these takeovers were gonna be rarer and rarer and rarer, and at some point, like the incident rate of like you're close to an accident, you get into an accident, was going to be less than the rideshare driver, and everybody is going to buy our solution, right? That's what we thought. But we learned that the answer is no by far. You have to build something that is as good as the most attentive driver in all conditions for people to adopt. And so that actually is a bit why like something like Waymo or Cruise cannot churn these things out very, very rapidly. In the places that they operate. Again, the place really matters. That was actually right on Optimus Ride as well. So it's very difficult to get the same stats in, say, Boston, as opposed to Phoenix, Arizona. You can operate in Phoenix, you can compare yourself with the rideshare driver, statistically speaking, you have that much data, you're better. But that doesn't mean that they adopt. You have to be a lot better than that. So then in Cruise and Waymo, we started changing the metrics. Like we used to call it a safety risk. Now we call it what we call an enterprise risk. You don't want the vehicle to be safe only. You want it to do the right thing. Like people look at the car and it's doing something stupid. They say it's a stupid car. Why would you do that? And they don't want to ride it, right? It could even be safe. So then I think people now adopted these metrics. These are very recent, like maybe 2 years old, but that's why I'm like a lot more optimistic. One thing that I do see is that if you look at the rate of collisions per, so like we used to do this thing, in a company, in a high-tech growth tech company, you can get obsessed over one metric and you'll improve it exponentially fast. I'm a little out of time, but the professor in me will do like some blackboard. So you know, you pick a metric. We used to pick sort of, let's say, miles until a safety critical event. So this is an event where you're too close or you collided with something and so on. How many miles can you travel up until then? And this is time. And we would put like at various times different software releases, how well they're doing. So we would put this on a semi-log plot and we would see a line. So this is logarithmic, this is linear, exponential growth. You tell people that this is the metric. You need 3 things. It's like a stool with 3 legs. You need good talent, you need good metrics, and you need good tools. People need software tools. So for example, if they have a new idea, they want to be able to quickly test whether that'll improve anything. And if you just set this up that way, and you tell them this is the metric, compounding returns. Every month, they'll improve it 0.5%. That compounds. And you get to this thing. So now, sometime at around 2022, we passed this mark of the rideshare driver. Your average driver is a little bit better. And then the most attended driver is a little bit better. So we hope to hit here maybe sometime around 2026, 2027. I think that'll be kind of like the time that they actually roll out. And so a lot of people look at these types of graphs to go for. And maybe this is another thing for your company. Like sometimes when you're really obsessed with one metric, you have good talent, you have good metrics, and you have good tools for them to keep pursuing. You just need to make sure that they pay attention to that. The difficulty for us is that this was the wrong metric, I think, from the onset. People didn't adopt it, right? I'm out of time. If any other questions, I can stay here for another like 10, 15 minutes. Thank you so much.